The American colonies are ablaze. The year is 1777. The air crackles with tension, like a thunderstorm that never quite breaks. The British have already taken New York City. The Hudson River, long, winding, and rich with timber, trade, and tactical importance, has become the lifeline of the war. Whoever controls the Hudson controls the colonies. It's that simple. Up and down its banks, farms and villages prepare for the worst. Church bells no longer just call to worship. They ring out in alarm. Each creak of a wagon wheel on a dirt path, each shout from the woods, could be the first sign that war has come knocking. Now imagine you're standing in the heart of Fredericksburg, New York, a rural town nestled in the rolling highlands of what would later become Putnam County. Life here is hard and honest. Families work sunup to sundown just to stay afloat. There's no room for luxury and even less room for disloyalty. Neighbors whisper about Tories, those loyal to the king, and keep their muskets within arm's reach. The revolution isn't just happening in distant cities. It's here, in their barns, in their dinner tables, in their prayers, and in the middle of it all is the Ludington family. Colonel Henry Ludington is more than just a respected local figure. He's the commander of the local militia, a veteran of the French and Indian War. He knows what real battle looks like, and he knows it could arrive on his doorstep at any moment. But he's not a wealthy general sitting in some far-off city. He's a working man, a farmer, and a father of 12. His home is no fortress, but it might as well be. On any given evening, the Ludington farmhouse transforms into a flurry of military activity. Maps are unfurled across the kitchen table. Messages are delivered on horseback at all hours. The scent of powder and candle wax lingers in the air. Even the children, too young to understand strategy, know enough to stay quiet when the men are talking in low, urgent voices. And there, in the shadows, is Sybil. 16 years old, the eldest daughter, she moves quietly but notices everything. She listens when her father and his fellow officers talk about the latest British movements. She studies the routes sketched on homemade parchment maps. She sees the worry etched in her mother's eyes as she prepares meals for hungry militiamen, not knowing if her husband will come back from his next command. To most, she's just a girl, but in her heart, Sybil is already something more. She's a patriot, a quiet one, but make no mistake, she understands what's at stake. She's seen men leave home with rifles on their backs, waving to children who won't remember the sound of their voice. She's watched her neighbors choose sides, and she's heard the gunshots in the distance, closer each week. The war isn't theoretical, it's personal, and the British know it. That spring, they've begun moving more aggressively into the interior. Raids on rebel supply stores have become routine. Entire towns, loyal to the patriot cause, are burned as examples. It's no longer just soldiers fighting soldiers. It's armies threatening communities, families, futures. Which brings us to the night of April 26, 1777. The Ludington family sits down for supper, likely something humble, stewed vegetables, cornbread, maybe salted pork if they're lucky. The candles flicker. The wind outside picks up then. A pounding at the door, a rider drenched in rain nearly collapses into the entryway. His voice is ragged from shouting. Danbury is under attack. The British, nearly 2,000 strong, under the command of General William Tryon, have landed in Connecticut. They're marching inland, and they've already begun to torch the supply depots, cannons, gunpowder, tents, everything the Continental Army needs to stay in the fight, and they're not stopping. The message is clear. The Hudson Valley could be next. Colonel Ludington's face tightens. He knows what he must do. All up the militia. But the problem is how. His men are scattered across dozens of farms, valleys, and hamlets. Some are up to 20 miles away. The roads are nothing more than muddy tracks. Night has fallen, the rain is relentless, and the courier who brought the message, he's exhausted, barely able to sit upright in the saddle. The colonel stands there, torn. His men must be warned, but who can he send? And then, from across the room, Sybil steps forward. She doesn't make a speech. She doesn't ask for permission. She simply says, "I'll go." It's a moment that shifts the entire room. Her father hesitates, more out of love than doubt. But in Sybyl's eyes, he sees something unmistakable: determination, not youthful defiance, not foolish bravery, conviction. She knows the backcountry roads. She knows where the militia men live, and most of all, she knows time is running out. There's no ceremony, no farewell, just a cloak thrown over her shoulders and the creak of leather as she swings onto her horse. As thunder rolls through the hills and rain begins to pour in sheets, Sybil rides into the night, not for glory, but for duty, for freedom, and for the revolution, raging not just on battlefields, but in the hearts of those who dared to answer its call. So, who was Sybil Ludington? She wasn't famous, not in her lifetime. She didn't seek medals or mention in newspapers. She didn't leave behind volumes of letters like Abigail Adams or lead troops like Deborah Sampson. She was a teenager, a daughter, a sister, a farm girl from the Hudson Valley. But what makes her story so compelling is exactly that. She was ordinary, and still chose to be extraordinary. Born in 1761, Sybil grew up in a time when children were expected to work early, marry young, and keep quiet, especially girls. But the Ludington household wasn't typical. Her father, Colonel Henry Ludington, was a respected militia officer and a patriot who didn't just talk revolution. He lived it. And Sybil, she was his shadow. As the eldest of 12 children, Sybil carried a weight beyond her years. She helped her mother manage the home, tended to her siblings, and ran the kind of everyday operations that most people would overlook, but that kept the household, and in many ways the community, functioning. But she wasn't sheltered. Sybil rode horses across rough, wooded terrain before she was 10. She'd seen soldiers trudge through her yard, boots caked with mud and faces streaked with ash. She knew the tension of whispered conversations about British movements. She saw firsthand how war didn't just unfold in battle, it trickled into kitchens, bedrooms, barns, and perhaps most importantly, she was fiercely intelligent. Sybil listened. She paid attention. She could read a map and understand military urgency. Her father often said she had a head for command. And that wasn't just fatherly pride, it was the truth. In a house where patriot strategy was discussed over supper, Sybil absorbed every word. She was also spirited. Some accounts describe her as bold, with a quiet defiance behind her polite demeanor. She wasn't reckless, but she wasn't afraid to speak her mind when it mattered. That kind of balance between composure and courage would be the very thing that saved lives when the moment came. So, when she volunteered to ride into the night, no one should have been surprised, because Sybil Ludington wasn't raised to wait for permission to do the right thing. She was raised to do it. The rain had no mercy. It lashed against the shutters. It turned the roads into rivers of mud, the kind of storm that made even the most seasoned traveler hesitate. But not Sybil. She mounted her horse, a strong, familiar chestnut named Star, and didn't look back. Her cloak, soaked within minutes, clung to her skin. Her boots were slick. Her hat sagged under the weight of the water, and her hands were raw from gripping the reins. She had no lantern, no escort, no map, just resolve and the knowledge that every minute counted. The route ahead was over 40 miles of rugged terrain. No straight highways, no signs, just crude paths carved through dense woods and hills, cutting across the rural heart of New York's Dutchess and Putnam counties. She would ride through storm, darkness, and danger, not once for glory, but again and again, home after home, farm after isolated farm, calling the militia to arms. Imagine it, alone in the pitch-black night. Trees looming like sentinels, the sound of thunder cracking overhead, echoing through the valleys. Her horse slipping on wet roots, stumbling over loose stones. Sybil's heart pounding, not just from fear, but urgency. Every passing second meant the British could be torching another barrel of gunpowder or pressing deeper into patriot-held territory. At each house, she would shout, pounding on doors or calling names through the rain. To arms, the British are burning Danbury. In one home, a father bolts upright from sleep. In another, a teenage boy grabs his musket and kisses his mother goodbye. Lanterns are lit. Saddles are thrown onto horses in haste. The alarm is spreading. Because of her, she rides on. She doesn't stop, not when her legs ache, not when branches whip across her face, not even when wolves howl in the distance. Real threats in those wooded lands. This wasn't just a ride, it was a mission, and it was dangerous. If she'd fallen, if she'd gotten lost, if a Tory sympathizer had caught wind of what she was doing, Sybil Ludington could have vanished into the dark, a name history never knew. But she didn't. She kept going, through storm, through fatigue, through fear, because at 16 years old, Sybil knew something that many grown men forgot. Freedom doesn't wait, and neither would she. We often hear the name Paul Revere echo across the pages of history books, and for good reason. His midnight ride on April 18, 1775, warning the militias that the British are coming, became a symbol of colonial resistance, a beacon of patriotic defiance. But what if I told you that Sybil Ludington rode twice as far, through worse weather, at a younger age, and with no poet to immortalize her, no Longfellow, no heroic statue in Boston, at least not for a long time. Just a quiet girl with grit in her soul and a storm at her back. Now, that's not to downplay Revere's role. He was vital, but the contrast is striking. Paul Revere rode with fellow messengers. He was captured briefly, then released. His mission was organized and supported by a well-connected network. Sybil, she rode alone, in darkness so complete you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, in cold April rain, with lightning threatening to spook her horse at every turn. Her mission was spontaneous, urgent, and improvised, born out of sheer necessity, not pre-planned coordination, and yet she succeeded. By dawn, her message had traveled across 40 miles of countryside. Thanks to Sybil, hundreds of militiamen were alerted and began to muster at her father's home, ready to ride toward Danbury and confront the British threat. The militia didn't stop the British from burning Danbury entirely, but they did harass them on their return, forcing a retreat, inflicting losses, and saving further towns from destruction. The British plan, meant to scare the colonists into submission, was disrupted. Morale among the patriots remained intact, and the reason, a 16-year-old girl who said, "I'll go." Think about that. She wasn't famous, she wasn't a soldier, she didn't wear a uniform, and yet, in that moment, she was a commander. Not in title, but in courage, in initiative, in heart. For years, she remained in the background. Her story passed down quietly, a local legend known mostly to New Yorkers and historians. But if we measure heroism not by headlines, but by sacrifice, by sheer personal risk for the sake of others, then Sybil Ludington rides alongside the greatest names of the Revolution, no less worthy, no less bold, just unsung, until now. Morning light broke slowly over the misty hills of the Hudson Valley. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. Mud churned along wagon tracks, tree branches lay broken across fields, and puddles glimmered in the grass like fresh scars. The countryside looked battered, but alive. So was Sybil. Her cloak clung heavy with rain and mud. Her hands were blistered raw from gripping the reins for hours. Her eyes, red from wind and exhaustion, blinked in the soft light as she finally returned home. Her ride completed, her mission fulfilled. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet of dawn and the warmth of a door opening to receive her. Inside, the Ludington home stirred with a new kind of urgency. Dozens of militiamen were arriving, shaking off sleep, throwing on jackets, strapping powder horns and muskets to their sides. Wet boots stamped across wooden floors. Instructions were given in hushed, firm tones, and at the heart of it all was Sybil. She watched it unfold, not as a child, but as someone who had helped make it happen. The alarm had been sounded. The men were gathering. The mission was no longer just her father's, it was hers too. Thanks to her ride, hundreds of local troops were mobilized. The militia soon advanced toward Danbury and Ridgefield, engaging the British forces on their retreat. It wasn't a clean Patriot victory, but it was a successful stand. It showed that the colonists wouldn't go quietly, that even in the dark, through storms and chaos, someone would always rise to carry the call. But for Sybil, there was no medal, no parade, no commission. She returned to her chores, helped with her siblings, milked cows, chopped vegetables. Her name faded into the quiet of rural life, just a teenage girl again. And yet, something had changed. Those who knew her spoke differently after that night. The townsfolk didn't forget. The local militiamen, their families, they passed the story down. A girl who rode alone in a storm to defend her country. That doesn't go unnoticed, not even in the smallest towns. Still, the world moved on. The war raged for years to come. Sybil grew older, married, had a son, buried loved ones, lived through hardship and triumph like so many others of her generation. But that night ride, it never left her, because how could it? When you've once held the fate of your neighbors in your hands, when you've outrun fear on a horse through the thunder and the trees, you never forget. And neither should we. History has a funny way of forgetting the quiet ones. Sybil Ludington rode through rain and fear to save her community. She did what no one else would or could. But after the war, after the smoke cleared and the treaties were signed, her name faded. There were no history books with her portrait. No street names, no school chapters, no poems echoing her bravery in every classroom. For a long time, Sybil Ludington was just a footnote, if that. And why? Maybe because she was young, maybe because she was a woman, or maybe because her story wasn't captured in real time by the pens of the powerful. Paul Revere had a poet. Sybil had a storm. She lived a full life, married a man named Edmund Ogden, a Revolutionary War veteran himself. They had a son, moved north to upstate New York, worked hard as most did, buried loved ones, watched the new nation she helped defend stumble and grow. She died in 1839 at the age of 77 and was buried quietly, her grave tucked into a modest cemetery in Paterson, New York. No parades, no monuments, at least not yet. For almost a century, her story lived only in the soft murmurs of family legend and local lore. A name passed down like a secret, spoken at hearths, retold around firelight, but barely remembered outside a few towns along the Hudson. Until, at last, someone decided to listen. In the early 20th century, a wave of renewed interest in revolutionary heroines stirred historians and civic leaders alike. The daughters of the American Revolution, eager to honor women's overlooked contributions, uncovered Sybil's story. They began to restore her name, raise statues, place markers along her legendary route. But still outside of New York State, most Americans never heard of her. And even now, when we talk about the brave messengers of the Revolution, her name doesn't always make the list. But here's the thing. Just because history forgets someone doesn't mean they weren't important. Sometimes the truest heroes are the ones who never asked to be remembered, the ones who acted because they had to. Because it was right, because freedom depended on someone stepping forward. That was Sybil Ludington. She didn't need a stage. She had a saddle. She didn't need recognition. She had purpose. And while the pages of history may have turned without her name in bold, her legacy rides on quiet, steady, and fiercely unforgettable. The echo of Sybil Ludington's ride didn't end at dawn. It rippled, quietly, steadily, through generations. You might not hear her name in every classroom. Her story might not be carved into the marble of Capitol monuments. But her courage, it's in the DNA of every woman who stepped forward when the world told her to sit down. Sybil didn't just ride for Danbury. She rode for the daughters who would come after her, for every girl told she was too young, too small, too soft to make history, for every woman whose bravery lived in shadows, for every citizen who ever wondered if one person, even a teenager, could truly make a difference. She answered with hooves pounding through the night, yes, and that ride, that impossible, courageous ride, has lived on in the choices of women across centuries, in the nurses of Civil War battlefields, in suffragists marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, in codebreakers during World War II, women pilots ferrying bombers, and civil rights activists registering voters at risk of their lives. They didn't all know Sybil's name. But they followed her path because her story is bigger than the Revolutionary War. It's about how history doesn't always come dressed in medals and titles. Sometimes it's a 16-year-old girl soaked to the bone, pushing through terror because someone had to. And that's what makes her legacy matter more than ever today. We live in a world where courage still calls us, though the terrain looks different. The storms are digital. The battles are for truth, for justice, for voices to be heard. But the heart of it remains the same. Will you speak when others go quiet? Will you stand when the ground shakes? Will you ride when no one else will? That's the spirit Sybil left us. Not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol, a signal flare across the years, reminding us that action isn't about age or fame or power, it's about heart. Every time someone says, "What can one person do?" her answer is still galloping through time. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it rides through rain and darkness, never asking for thanks, only that the message gets through. Walk into any classroom today and ask students to name a hero of the American Revolution. You'll hear names like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, maybe even Paul Revere, but Sybil Ludington, silence. And yet, her legacy is all around us. You see it in the 14-year-old girl standing at the microphone at a school board meeting, speaking truth when it's uncomfortable. You see it in the young firefighter pulling on her gear, racing toward danger while others step back. In the teenage poll worker helping people vote. In the sister comforting a brother through grief. In the student staying up all night to defend a cause with no promise of reward. Sybil is still riding. Because bravery doesn't retire into textbooks. It doesn't stay buried under monuments or archived in dusty papers. It shows up now, in the decisions we make, the stands we take, the moments we choose to do what's right even when no one's watching. Her spirit lives on in quiet defiance, in everyday courage, in you. Maybe that's the most powerful part of her story. Sybil wasn't extraordinary because of royal blood, wealth, or status. She was ordinary, and that's exactly what makes her heroism timeless. She shows us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up even when you're terrified. About doing the right thing when it's raining, when it's dark, when the road ahead is unknown. And think about this. Sybil didn't know she'd be remembered. She didn't even know if she'd survive that night. She just knew the message had to get through. That lesson still matters, maybe more now than ever. We live in a noisy world, one that rewards fame and spectacle. But Sybil's life whispers something different. That meaning is made in moments of quiet conviction. That impact begins with one determined voice, a girl, a storm, a ride, and a choice. So when you face that moment, when fear and doubt cloud the path ahead, remember her. Picture her silhouetted against a lightning-streaked sky, soaked to the bone, shouting into the wind. To arms, the British are burning Danbury. Her world was on fire. She rode anyway. What will you do when your moment comes? Let's pause here, not just to remember Sybil Ludington, but to truly feel what her story asks of us. She didn't leave behind journals filled with grand words. She didn't seek a medal, a statue, or a parade. There were no selfies, no headlines, no trending hashtags to capture her moment. Just a teenage girl, a soaked cloak, and the pounding rhythm of her horse echoing through a storm-drenched night. And yet, here we are, more than 2 centuries later, still talking about her. Why? Because Sybil's ride wasn't just about a warning. It was a witness, a testament to what a single soul, full of fire and conviction, can do when called. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need a perfect plan. She didn't need someone to tell her she was enough. She simply went, and in doing so, she joined an invisible army, One made not of soldiers with bayonets, but of ordinary people rising to extraordinary moments. People like you, that's what history is, in the end. Not a list of famous names frozen in marble. It's human choices. Difficult, risky, quiet ones. It's what happens in the space between fear and action, between comfort and conscience. And if Sybil teaches us anything, it's this. You don't need to be remembered to make a difference. You just need to show up. Maybe your ride won't be on horseback. Maybe it'll be a long night caring for someone you love. Or standing up when no one else will. Or refusing to stay silent when truth is under threat. In those moments, you join Sybil's legacy, not just by honoring her name, but by living what she stood for. So the next time someone asks you, "What can I possibly do?" tell them about the girl who rode 40 miles through thunder and rain to sound an alarm that still echoes today. And then ask yourself, what's your ride? Because someone somewhere is waiting for a message only you can carry, and history is still being written right now by people just like her, by people just like you. So the next time someone asks you about Paul Revere, tell them about Sybil Ludington. Tell them about the girl who rode through thunder and fear, who wasn't looking for fame, but for freedom. Tell them history isn't finished being written, and that maybe, just maybe, the next chapter is waiting for someone just like her. Or you, what other unsung heroes do you think deserve to be remembered? Drop a comment below. Let's talk. Let's honor the forgotten voices. And if this story moved you, share it, because history lives when we tell it. Until next time, this is Liberty Unfolded, where freedom stories find their voice.